And let me just take a moment. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what's going on in Baltimore and say certainly our thoughts and prayers need to be with the individuals in Baltimore, the leadership there, and also the community. It's troublesome when you see a national city that's known across this world as well being in such turmoil, and we certainly wish them well and offer them our thoughts and prayers, and any support that we can certainly offer, we will, to the residents and that community. With that said, it's ironic that they're having those issues because we're here to talk about community. We're here to talk about what we're doing as a group, not only as Department of Public Safety, but what we're doing as a community to deal with some of the issues that are plaguing many parts of our city. Today we're going to do what we've talked about many times in this room. Is there's a couple of rules that we have, and I know we won't have a lot of discussion today, but we will after we're finished. Number one, we will certainly keep it well under an hour. That's one of our first rules. Number two, all viewpoints are going to be heard. So when we have little breakouts later, if you want to talk about something, everyone will be respectful and understanding that. And the third thing is we want to be honest. We have to be completely honest about some of the issues we face without pointing blame in the past or anything along those lines. Let's just work towards the future and let the past be the past, except when we have to look at the past to chart a way to the future. So with that, I just want to kind of reset and just remember, we've been doing this for 3 months. 3 months. We're not going to change systemic issues in 3 months. So let's be clear about that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I want to go back to when I first arrived and kind of explain to you why we did a lot of stuff we did within the first couple of years that I was here. First of all, when Mayor Ballard hired me, he asked me to do two things. Number one, to establish good business principles, and number two, to bring data to a level that we've never had in the city of Indianapolis before. And I was speaking with John Toohey a moment ago from the Star. He interviewed me before I was the Director of Public Safety here in Indianapolis, and we talked about this very thing. Matter of fact, I knew about this room, knew about the technology we had, and this was our vision from the beginning to be in this place today. But we had to establish good business principles before we could ever look at data, and we had to collect data. Some of the data we had was not very good, and the police department sat down, EMS under Dr. Miramonte's leadership, really started looking at data, the fire department, all these teams, and we really started looking at data we could start compiling. But before we looked at the data, we put together a business improvement cycle. Now this is where I get a little nerdy, so be with me. I've got to talk about it. I want to do it just for a second. Here's how this works. We sat down as a Department of Public Safety, and when I say we, our executive team, and a big part of that from the beginning is Deputy Director Valerie Washington that's here. And we sat down and decided if we're going to be a Department of Public Safety that's responsible for 85% of the city's general fund, then we need to be accountable to the citizens, and we need to try to be as efficient and effective as possible. And we have to stop governing by whatever crisis comes down the road. We need to use metrics and figure out best practices and use those instead of only reacting time and time again. So we put goals and objectives together for all 8 of our divisions. And then we did something, we brought accountability into the goals and objectives. We sat down and had administrative reviews. And we sat down and we talked about quarterly, and we opened all this up to the public. You hear us talk about open data. We opened all this up to the public, and we had discussions about what we were doing well and what we weren't doing so well, and we had honest discussions. And from that, we learned that there are some things that we were doing poorly, and doing it poorly for years, and so we put efficiency teams together. We've had about 60 efficiency teams now. They deal with administrative, fiduciary, and operational issues. We looked at all those things and we worked very hard. The key to the efficiency teams, it just wasn't internal. We went out and found the best and brightest in the community to help us with whatever issue we were dealing with. We asked the affected unions to be involved and to give their input and their expertise. And we sat down as a community and vetted these issues. And then when the issues were resolved and we thought we had a good game plan, the findings from those efficiency teams became attached to the goals and objectives. And that's our cycle of improvement. The reason I bring that up, and you think, what does that have to do with data? It has everything to do with data. We need to be able to set metrics as an organization and achieve those. We need to be able to look at the situation that we have and make sure that we set goals and objectives to find resolution to those issues. We need to sit down and understand how to work with the community, as we did in the efficiency team, to deal with systemic issues and hard, tough issues to overcome. It was a training process in addition to making us much more efficient and effective. And I take no credit in that. I take the credit in having the idea, but the operational part was our men and women of the department, the citizens community, under the leadership of Valerie Washington. And not only are we more effective than we've ever been, we've saved taxpayers over $10 million. That's important, which leads us now to data. Since we have a better understanding of metrics, we are now able to talk about data. So we started looking at data. And as I said, our data was not very good. So we started looking at data from 2013 through July and August of 2014. Many of you all have seen that data. The data led us to 6 areas, not just high crime areas, but where the degradation of quality of life continued day in and day out, month to month, decade after decade. These are our 6 areas, and we said at that point, we apologized to the citizens of those communities and said, we feel like we can do better for you, and we haven't served you in the best way possible. We need to earn your respect back. We continue to say that, and you'll hear more about how we went about that during this conversation today. I'm not going to break down all 6 areas, but just to refresh your memory, if you live in this area, you live in an area that has a 595% greater likelihood to have a homicide than any other place in the city of Indianapolis. You have a 607% greater likelihood to have a non-fatal shooting than any other place in the city of Indianapolis. And I will say this later, and I've said this numerous times, the only difference between a homicide and non-fatal shooting is where the bullet landed. The intent was always the same, and we need to have that discussion as a community. Focus area, look at the mental health runs, 239% greater. We didn't see that coming, quite frankly. At the bottom, you're talking about 8 square miles, 4.7% of the population is responsible or lives in communities. They're not responsible, they live in communities that has 27% of all of our homicides and 30% of our non-fatal shootings. Just 4.7% of our population. 8 square miles. 8 square miles. Some of the toughest miles we'll have in the city. And yet, EMS, 14% of all their mental and emotional runs occur where 4.7% of our population lives. What makes these numbers more troublesome, we'll talk more in depth about this in a moment, is that we get calls on emergencies, but we necessarily won't get calls on quality of life issues. When we have a couple of break-ins in some neighborhoods in our community, Chief Hite's phone rings off the hook. Our phone in our office rings off the hook. Citizens demand actions in healthy neighborhoods. In some of these neighborhoods, we'll have a couple of homicides over the weekend and we will not get one phone call. That's changing though, and we're going to explain that here in a moment. So we are becoming very aware that we are dealing with generational issues and decades of momentum in the wrong direction. And we have to be very clear that in 3 months we're not going to solve these issues. We have to come up with generational solutions. Arrest is not going to work. Arrest is a short-term thing that can help, but it's not a long-term response to the issues that we're facing. So here's some of the new data that you haven't seen before in the 6 areas that we've been compiling. One of the things we were very cognizant of and really tried hard to do is not to say anything negative about the residents of these areas. They cannot help that they live in a high crime area. They cannot help that they live in an area that has poor quality of life. You've seen the charts from code enforcement to crime. They cannot help that. And for some in our community, they have said, well, they're committing crimes, they're doing all this. What this data is telling you is that of all the people that are arrested in each one of these areas, most of the people live outside of the areas that are coming there to commit the crimes. In our highest crime area, 34th in Illinois, 83% of the people arrested don't live there. That's not a healthy community. We have to do more for the vast majority that live in these communities that are just trying to make ends meet. They deserve better. Now here's the good news. We have trouble getting information in these areas, and Tibbs, the Crime Stopper, since we announced this and our community partners have been involved and we've had community conversations, in each one of these areas. Tips to Crime Stoppers has increased by 30% for IMPD and 26% for the Marion County Sheriff's Office. That is good news. That's residents saying they trust their police department enough to share information. Now, are they sharing information anonymously? Yes, but you know what's key about this? They're giving us information on crimes that have occurred that may not have been reported. They're using Crime Stoppers as a way to report crime. That's a step in the right direction. I'm very grateful to the residents that live in these areas for giving us that opportunity to prove ourselves, and that is a step in the right direction. That's some of the good news. Some other good news. We had 18 fatalities in this city last year. The good news is we've only had one this year. Last year, 10 of our fatalities were in focus areas or very close to our focus areas. We've had 0 this year. And I have to say, that's because our fire department has gone into a collaborative relationship with the American Red Cross here in Indiana, and they have been using our data to go into these areas to put smoke detectors. Think about this. If you can't afford to put food on the table, are you going to go out and buy a smoke detector? And we know that we have saved 5 lives in this city. American Red Cross has saved 13 lives nationally, 5 in Indianapolis. Why? Because they're using our data, and I'm very grateful to the fire department for their leadership and for American Red Cross to value human lives. Now, people say, how does this affect crime? It's a direct correlation. We're showing people we care about them. We care about their families. We have saved lives. We've saved young people's lives. People know that we're invested and we're going to continue. And the American Red Cross with other partners will have some more exciting news regarding that later this year. Here's the bad news. In 2008, this nation had the greatest economic downturn with the exception of the Great Depression. One of the things I want to look at is if we're looking at growth in Indianapolis, and people are excited about that, but where is the growth occurring? Well, in these 6 areas, the growth is occurring in poverty. In Marion County, from 2009 to 2013, poverty has increased by 23%. I want you to think about that as a moment. That's the cost of a downturn in the economy that we had gone through in this nation. 23%. Look at what that has done to these areas. The blue are these areas in 2009. They had poverty rates from 23% to a little over 30% in these areas. Now they have poverty rates from almost 30% to almost 50%. And you can see the increases in poverty in each one of these areas. It's just another example of those deep-rooted generational systemic issues that we're facing. Now, for those of you in the community, and our community partners, you know this. So you're probably thinking, you're not telling us anything new. Well, it took us a little while to get on board. We're understanding. We are looking at the data. So we want to make sure that we understand that as a Department of Public Safety and more importantly, a community. For the first 3 months of this year, homicide rate, we've had 11 fewer homicides in the city. If you take in December, we've had 21 fewer homicides. That's when the police department had really started putting some work and working with our partners, and we had the special agent in charge from the FBI here today, and their work and some of those significant arrests have made an impact. But I want you to look at the focus areas and remember what we said early on. It may get worse before it gets better. And here's where we have to be honest and truthful. The homicide rate is up for the first quarter in these areas. And one of the reasons it's up because the quadruple homicide we had was in one of our focus areas. Have to be honest about that. We also have to look at shootings. We talked about that earlier. We had 80 shootings this time last year between January and March, non-fatal shootings. It's the same this year. So we've had fewer acts of gun violence because if you had non-fatal shootings and homicides, it's fewer this year. Our non-fatal shootings are the same, but in the focus areas, once again, the non-fatal shootings are up. Homicides are up by a couple and non-fatal shootings in these areas. So you can make the argument in many parts of this city it's getting better, but it's not in these 6 areas. We have to be honest. So one of the things that we want to talk about is really understanding data. If we're going to talk about data and use that operationally and understand that for every data point, it represents human beings. We can't lose fact of that. Sometimes we lose fact when we talk data with percentages and numbers. We're talking about human beings. So if we're going to do that, we have to look at homicides plus non-fatal shootings. In 2012, I heard people in the community talk about how safe we were as a community. We had 568 people shot in 2012. It may be a surprise to you to realize that we've had fewer people shot in 13 and 14 than we had in 2012. So I ask you, as a community, were we really safe in 2012? What's the difference between a homicide and a non-fatal shooting? Well, the bullet landed. The intent was always the same. More people tried to take a human life in 2012 than 13 and 14. The ironic thing, as you look at data, is that our homicide rates grew greatly. The year we had the most shootings was the year we had the fewest homicide rates. If we're not sophisticated in data, we'll miss the warning signs and precursors to homicides. We had an increase in homicides in 13, an increase in 14, even though both the years had lower shooting rates than 12. So you have to ask the question, why? What is the data telling us? What are we hearing on the streets? Well, so we're going to be even more sophisticated as we talk about the data. Look at 2012. 70% of all suspects in homicides had a criminal history. 73% of the victims of homicides had a criminal history. In just 2 years, that jumped to 92% and 81%, a 22% jump in 2 years. I didn't think it could go any higher. Look at so far 2015. Homicide rates down. Non-fatal shootings are about the same, but shootings overall are down slightly. And now we have 94% that have local criminal histories and 90% that victims have local criminal histories. These are only local histories. These aren't if you committed a crime in Chicago and moved to Indianapolis. So I would say to you, as people challenge the police department to do more, and that's healthy, and we're okay with that. And we urge people to hold us accountable and hold the police department, our departments accountable. But I would tell you that the data tells us that the police department is doing the right people. The question for us in Indiana is, why do they keep getting out of jail? How can you shoot 8 or 9 human beings and only do 2.5 years in prison? How can you be put away for 16 years and only be out in 784 days? These are stories that have resulted in other crimes in our community that could have been averted if we take that seriously. And I want to thank the FBI for coming into our 6 areas and coming into this city and helping us with mandatory minimum sentencing. And one of the reasons that we're seeing a decline in some of the homicides is because we've been able to make some significant arrests with their help, and with successful federal prosecution, we will not see some of these violent offenders that have a history of violence in our community for a generation. That's tough policing, but it'll have a significant impact. Here's the crime numbers now. Homicides down 35% as of April 15th. If you take in December, they're down 39%. And the other notable decreases in crime in the city for the police department. Now, you may say, how come we haven't heard more of this? How come the police department's not celebrating more? You know why? Because we understand. We have to be very clear. If we're going to be more sophisticated as a community, and the reason I'm giving these data points, I want you to think about the focus areas. We have to be more sophisticated. The homicide drop, we have to understand non-fatal shootings. They're both up in the focus areas. We're continuing to fight that fight. Down in the city, both up in the focus areas. The crime is down across the board, but a healthy sign may be for this community that some of these crime numbers go up next year. The reason I say that is one of our efficiency teams was talking about crime data. And we sat down to look at the crime data and crime nationally, and we found out that the Police Foundation out of Washington, D.C. said, and this is a startling number, 30 to 50% of all crime in America goes underreported. So if we want to be serious about meeting the needs of citizens in our focus areas, it may be okay to see crime increasing, because the crime's always been there, but now citizens feel more comfortable in reporting crime. We should not penalize a police department because they're forging partnerships that are helping people report crime. We want to make it easier than ever for people to report crime in this city, whether it's by telephone, internet, or whatever unique way we come up with. Please lead the discussion that that's not necessarily a bad thing. That means community members are more involved than ever. So we want to talk a little bit about commitment from our divisions, and then give you the long list of partners that are not just saying they're going to be partners, that are already in these areas doing work. And it's a remarkable list. But one of the things I want to talk about first is within the director's office. We sat down early on and started having community conversations around this city. And then we made a commitment we're going to have community conversation in each one of our areas, and we have been in all 6 of our areas. And we took the information we heard from young people, from single moms, from people struggling in these areas, and we put them into our goals and objectives as for the focus. And this is kind of an executive summary. It's not everything that we have done, but I want to show you some of the things that all your 8 divisions are working on within the Department of Public Safety. First is going to be the police department. And we're back to data. The goal is the amount of property crime arrests they make in areas, establishing a sense of community and a sense of quality of life. So if they're going to increase the arrest for those type of crimes, that means that more people have to report those crimes, and crime may go up in these areas. That may be a good indicator. We need to be more sophisticated. They are working with young people at great numbers to take them and get them involved with their police department, not only to restore the partnership, police and community, but hopefully some of these young people will decide to serve this great city in the capacity of a police officer someday. That would be the perfect scenario for us. And who would have ever thought that you would hear your police department talking about the way to reduce crime is to deal with mental illness? They've held 2 mental health forums already, and they have 2 more on the way. It's an important part, shows an evolution in this city. The Indianapolis Fire Department, I've talked to you about their great partnership with the Red Cross, but they've also decided that they were going to go into each one of these areas and inspect, and they wanted to have a goal in 2015 of inspecting 90% of the parcels there, and they've already inspected 100%. They got so engaged in that community, in those communities, they went in and they have 1,232 properties in 3 months. Think about that commitment. Think about that. And here's something that I love. Chief is at a fire conference today, but one of the things that he said during his interview is that he wanted to make sure that the firehouses became the center of activity in some of these communities that didn't really have a community center. And he's opened the door, and his staff, to all the firehouses, and we're working in partnership to do even more of that. And one of the things that became apparent during the community conversations is people kept saying, we do not have easy, accessible health care. Meaning when they have an emergency that they may not have to call 911, or their child has a cut and they have to drive to a hospital, that in many cases they passed up 2 or 3 firehouses to get to the hospital. And we have individuals there that are willing to help and have the skills. So we're wanting to reintroduce our firehouses and our firefighters to the communities they serve. EMS, working with Eskenazi Midtown Mental Health. They're going to do something cool with social workers. They're going to work with individuals that are repeat offenders. They continue to go to the hospitals to try to meet their needs. They're going to work with individuals with mental illness. They're going to target the 6 areas to learn what works, what doesn't work, and replicate this hopefully throughout the rest of the city. Additionally, they're going to look at those individuals that are victims of violent crime and what can the healthcare community do to make that better? What can they do as a group? And that is pretty forward thinking, and we're grateful to EMS and the partnership with Eskenazi to make this possible. Homeland Security and our Public Safety Communications is working together on data. While Homeland Security is putting all this together and working with our partners, Public Safety is working on a new computer system that will generate more data than we've ever had. And the other key is that we need to have continued volunteer support, and they're helping gather volunteers. During our community conversations, a lot of people said that they had pets they couldn't care for. Animal Care Control is going to go into these areas and offer help. They're going to offer free services as a result. And by the way, while they're there, because so many residents are without food, they're going to an opportunity to feed individuals while others come in from EMS and other departments and talk about mental health, drug dependency issues, and get the help that some of the people there need. Mayor's Office of Reentry is focusing on 100 at-risk reentrants, and they're working with the police department. Home visits 60 days before you get out of prison, visiting with the family as well, offering wraparound services. These are people that are coming out that the data shows us has a propensity to be involved in a homicide, whether a victim or a suspect. And we're going to focus on them, talk to them, try to get them restored on a path that's better, that's productive, and they can enjoy a productive life and be a productive citizen of this community. However, we have to be clear that not everyone's going to take that opportunity. So when they don't take the opportunity, they make the decision to go back to the life they were living before, put them in prison before they take another life in our city, or before they harm another person in our city. That's important to us as a community. I think it's fair, and I think it's a tremendous, tremendous step in the right direction by Office of Reentry and the police department, who's already doing some of that in other areas as well. Now let me be clear, 100 sounds like a lot. We have 6,000 to 8,000 people coming back from prison each and every year in the city of Indianapolis. We have to be serious about jobs for reentrants, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Citizen Complaint Office, spending just a little bit more time than I was, just simply because of what's going on in Baltimore. The great untold story in the city of Indianapolis, and it's frustrating to me, quite frankly, is that when I arrived, I heard from citizens and officers their frustration with the way the complaint process was laid out. I heard from citizens it took far too long. I heard from, and in these areas we heard the same thing from the community, that they never got feedback. We have revamped the way we take complaints. We have streamlined the complaint process. We have completely overhauled the way we handle administrative complaints on officers. We have completely revamped the way we handle criminal complaints on police officers. We have lowered the time frame for a complaint on an officer from 8 months to less than 5 months. People can get feedback. We have purchased software with the help of Manny Mendez, who did process mapping for this. We did all of this investment way before Ferguson was well known. We did it because we need to be accountable to the citizens we serve. I think it's the greatest untold story of the Department of Public Safety. Great deal of investment way before it became a national issue. And I will say this, I'm appreciative of the union, the FOP. I'm appreciative of the committees that met and their efficiency teams, because they laid out something that is a national model that we get asked about. It's not perfect. Our next step now is a lot of times when you complain on an officer and there's really no way to tell if the officer did something wrong or didn't do anything wrong, and maybe just a little mediation would help resolve that and restore trust. We're exploring that. How would that work to bring officers and complaints? And we recently had an officer that asked for that. And I will tell you this, there's a misnomer that officers don't want this. Officers asked me about this and challenged. They said, we don't mind to be held to a higher standard. We should be held to a higher standard. We just want to make sure that the standard's fair and the process is fair. We've tried to make it fair for everyone. So Lori White is here from the complaint office. She's going to all the meetings and explaining the process to all the residents as they're there. Now, you have with you, or there's some copies around here, the commitment from all these individuals that are involved. You've heard about the American Red Cross. You've heard about some of the money that CICF, Central Indiana Community Foundation, being involved in dollars, putting money into these areas. We have not had a community conversation or a data meeting that someone from CICF was not present. So we're not just talking about the possibilities of people being involved. These are people that are involved. You have the list here, but I want to thank all of these individuals. Public Safety Foundation, for instance. They have made our 6 areas a go for them to raise money. City Mosaic. I see representatives here from City Mosaic in what they're doing in these areas with I think it's over 50,000 parishioners that you represent in the different churches. And the volunteers and the mentoring shift that's already made in one local school and the reentrants that they're helping. Gleaners and the exciting things that they're doing, not only throughout the community, how they're going to focus in these 6 areas, and we'll have an announcement on that. IU Health and all the work that they've helped us with. The list goes on and on We have MESH that's helping us with analytics. We have NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness, that's going to do training for our officers in these 6 areas because we know that mental illness is an issue. And not just our officers, our firefighters and our EMS employees as well. United Way and the work there in the Polis Center, IUPUI, all the data they have shared with us to make this a reality. All the work that they're willing to do in the classroom with capstone projects and really sitting down and developing curriculum centered on good analytics for policing. I like to think what IUPUI is doing is learning from what we're doing as we learn together and developing the next generation of public safety leaders for this city. These are the commitments that we have so far, and you have a list. So once again, in recapping, this ends our educational part. Feel like we've really been, we on it for 3 months. We have all these partners, and we've been educating. We've been having meetings twice a month, really trying to get our arms around the issues. We'll continue the educational process, but now it's what I said last year, and we've had some of that already. These are systemic issues, and they're difficult. This is hard work. Let's not fool ourselves. This is hard work. And this is about the only time I'm going to get political today, and it's a nonpartisan political. There are going to be a lot of people running for office over the next few years. If anybody tells you they have a magic answer, one answer, they just don't understand public safety. There's a myriad of issues. There's many points we have to be involved in. As we said 2 years ago, from truancy to reentry at least, but really we need to look at birth to reentry. What are we doing to prepare people to be successful human beings? So phase 1 is behind us. Phase 2 begins today. It's rolling up our sleeves and really getting to work. And we're going to have some pretty significant meetings coming up. We're going to talk more about reentry, but don't be surprised when you come to those meetings if we don't have a couple of tables set up and some whiteboards and we hear from some reentrants and we hear firsthand knowledge of what they're dealing with in this community and working with our partners. You're going to hear more from Deputy Director Washington on Mental Health and Engagement Center. Is it fair, and we have to have this conversation, is it fair that a police officer, he or she studies, works hard, gets on the police department, and only to realize that 30 to 40% of the people they arrest has a mental illness? Is it fair to the person that's arrested and to that 30, 40% that's in the Marion County Jail, is it fair that this city continues to use the judicial system as a place to house the mentally ill? It is not fair, and we have to get our arms around that and do a better job of dealing with mental illness. We'll have that tough conversation. We're going to have the tough conversation about hunger. It breaks my heart when I hear young people community conversations say that they feel like no one loves them, cares for them, and they're hungry when school's not in session. We're going to talk more about vacant housing. Manny Mendez is here, he's doing tremendous work, exciting news. But when he gives his presentation, he's going to ask the community for help. And we're going to need help in youth employment, summer jobs. Last year we had a 5K, put money in to summer jobs. This year there's going to be a music festival for summer jobs. We're going to talk more about the great need for summer jobs in our community. And I want to say this. We have accomplished a lot. And when I say we, every one of you in this room have been here before. You're out on the streets doing the job each and every day. Many of you were doing the job before we even started looking at it within the Department of Public Safety. But I've got to say today, as the Director of Public Safety, I'm certainly humbled by the 3,200 men and women that comprise the Department of Public Safety and the work that they have done in 2.5 years to get us to this point. And when I was in Washington recently, at the White House at a meeting, somebody asked me, how did you get so far so fast? And I always like to say it's uniquely Indianapolis. It's unique in Indianapolis because we have a workforce willing to do that. Unions, quite frankly, willing to be involved in the solution. But it's also uniquely Indianapolis because in this city, if you don't collaborate, you get kicked out. It's the only thing you'll get in trouble for in Indianapolis. We collaborate. Other people can replicate what we're doing, but it's going to take them longer than 2.5 years. So on behalf of the 3,200 people that I represent today, and I'd like to say on behalf of the 42,000 residents in need, I just want to say to our partners in the room and these on the list and those that have been doing the job way before we got there, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. We stand not to come in and take over. We stand to support you, follow your lead, learn from you, and serve our citizens better. We have a lot to learn. We know that. We're willing to do that. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your work. God bless you, and may God keep our public safety officers safe. Thank you so much.